Okay, so the book that I did was Hacking Classroom Management: 10 Ideas to Help You Become the Type of Teacher That They Make Movies About. Okay, so I'm going to start off with my recommendation for a few reasons. One, I want to kind of critique the main ideas and talk about that just right off the bat to set the stage. Um, oops. But yeah, so do I recommend this book? Yes. Overall, yes. I would say out of 10, I'd give it like a 7, like a high score, but not like it did not blow me away. Um, for a few reasons. But for the benefits of it, the main ideas that I thought were done really well was there was a huge variety of tips throughout the whole book. And as a teacher, you can pick out the things that you know that would benefit you, that you know you're struggling with, and it's just throughout the whole book. So every chapter just has like hidden gems throughout it. And so as you read it, you will find things that benefit you. Like I can just say that completely confidently. And the layout was consistent. It was easy to understand. It was digestible. I really appreciated that as well. However, the reasons why I didn't give it full scores, there was a section called Overcoming Pushback in every chapter. And it would kind of say like people's like critiques to the his whole chapter thus far. People would say like, well, what if I don't have enough time to do, like he would kind of pose these questions that people would probably ask, and then he would discuss it and talk about like his like rebuttal. And I thought that some of the questions seemed very staged. Like he had a really good answer ready. So he posed that question specifically. And it wasn't actually a question that I would think is very common. And then also, I had questions that I wanted to ask, and obviously they're not in his book. So that was something that was like hard for me. Like, obviously, an interactive, like if he was a teacher teaching me, I would have had like specific questions. And after reading the book, I really want to ask them, and I don't know who to ask now. That could be a me problem. So that was probably, I didn't love that section overall. And it was on every chapter. But also, the entire piece was very opinion based. And that was, it was just his style of writing, and it had some pros to it. It made it more like friendly. You felt more comfortable as you're reading it. You don't feel like he's attacking you in any way. But at the same time, it just lacked this empirical foundation that I was looking for. Like it was almost, it was very easy to put down the book and say like, I don't have to do any of that, when in reality a lot of things he's talking about we should be doing. All right, so a brief summary. As I said, he lays out these 10 tips. I listed them here. I'm not going to go through every tip, but I am going to go through a few to show you an example. But the main point is that in every single chapter he presents this issue that happens, and then his tip, he goes through it and how that addresses the issue, and it all comes back to classroom management. Although I will say, I think his main point about classroom management sometimes gets lost in the nitty gritty of his points, but overall, he does do a good job of circling back at least to the topic at hand with each chapter. So, for example, hack number 9, which I really liked, was called Fist Bumps, High Fives, and Shout Outs. So, the problem that he presents at the beginning of the chapter is the beginning and ending of class are often wasted. That this is a time period in a lot of our classes that we end up don't utilize these times, the first few minutes and the last few minutes, to their highest capacity. We run out of time at the end, or we want to wait till every single student is in the classroom seated before we start teaching, or stuff like that. um, and so he goes through, and these are some of the tips that I pulled out that were really awesome. He said, make sure you are positive at the beginning of ending of class, that's the note you end on. Make sure that you have warm-ups. Just like when we exercise, we need to have warm-ups and cool downs. Don't always have them extremely curriculum based. Sometimes this is a really awesome opportunity to get to know your students, and being consistent with your warm-ups, having them every single day so students know what to expect. These are just awesome ways that we can perpetuate a positive atmosphere in our classroom and utilize every minute of the class. So this is an example of what one of his chapters would look like. Okay, so now I want to connect one of his chapters to the class that we're in right now. So this was hack number 7, reassess how you assess. And it was all about grading. And he gives these really awesome tips. This was one of my favorite chapters, but he gives these really awesome tips as to how the way we grade is, first of all, very traditional, and we haven't changed it at all. And it perpetuates negative ideas in students' heads about school. They become obsessed with their grades. They start to compare themselves, etc. And so he's saying, why are we doing this? Why haven't we changed how we grade? And this was a really interesting, this immediately brought me back to our class, where we have talked often about how students do not come into our classrooms as blank slates. They come in If we're teaching high school, they've had years to develop these bad habits of, I need to be grade focused. If I mess up, if I make a mistake, that's bad. I'm a bad student. I'm a bad person. And so as we are assessing how we're grading, as we're trying to implement these new tactics, we have to keep in mind that students are not coming in without any, they have all these ideas about who they are as a student as they're coming into our classroom. So we have to change the way we assess, or else we're just going to perpetuate these problems in this single story of a student in a high school in America. So I thought that was a really interesting connection to class, that we have to remember that students are coming in already having negative associations with how they're graded. So this was a hack I really liked as well. Hack 5, it says, walk their walk and talk their talk. So this one, he talks all about why don't we utilize social media? And I loved it, especially in connection to social studies specifically, that in social studies classrooms, utilizing social media. So whether that means showing YouTube videos, bringing up Donald Trump's tweets, or even having them create their own tweets in relation to the subject matter, or create their own Instagram post as their final project for a unit. Using social media not only helps the students feel more comfortable because they are often confident in their ability to use social media, but it also makes the projects more fun, and therefore they'll relate more to, they'll relate more to the subject matter, what you're talking about. I thought that was a really great hack. I think it applies perfectly to social studies classrooms. We shouldn't be shying away from social media. This is an awesome way to connect with our students. Okay, activity time. Sorry, I want to make sure my face isn't covering things, but I want to do briefly just an activity that he shared in the book. This was something he said. Tell a childhood funny story in order to connect with students. They love to hear about it. So I'm going to tell you a funny story to relate to this review. So this is me and my younger sister. Growing up, I tended to take control a lot. I was a very, I just was a very hands-on, kind of bossy child. And when I was in 4th grade, my teacher took it upon herself to call me out on this personality trait of mine that I didn't even know I had. And she embarrassed me in front of the whole class, made me come after school, and basically just like kind of ripped me apart. And to her credit, she had some good techniques and she meant well. Um, However, I may be a little bossy, or at least I was very bossy as a child, but I was also very sensitive. And so this brings me to this last quote that I want to share. It says, classroom management is about a lot more than implementing rules. It's about understanding your students. And the big point that he hits home, the main idea he really wants you to take away, is that when classroom management is out of control, it's because the students are bored, which means we're not reaching them, or they're overwhelmed. But either way, it stems from this issue that the teacher doesn't truly know her students. So the story of me in 4th grade with my teacher, she meant well, but she didn't understand the best way to come across to me. And it was definitely not to call me out in front of the whole class. That really put me back quite a few. Like, I really did not want to talk in her class. I didn't want to go to her class. I felt very uncomfortable. But if she had known me and better understood me, perhaps she could have done it in a more constructive way, because it really was a message that I needed to hear. And so that's the main point of his book. And I think it's a really awesome point that a lot of teachers need to continually be reminded of. So do I recommend you read it? Yes, I do. I think this is an awesome book. As I said, there are gems throughout it, but I do think skimming it will do the trick. I think you don't need to sit down and analyze every word of this book. I think if you read it through, highlight things you like, write them down, you're good to go.